Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. You're in for an awesome, meaningful, moving conversation today with our guest. His name is Nic Sheff. He's the best-selling author behind the book Tweak. He's also the subject of his father's best-selling book. It's a memoir, and it's also an award-winning film called Beautiful Boy. After taking his first drink of alcohol at just 11 years of age, Nick spiraled into addictions first with alcohol and then ultimately into far harder drugs and entered his first rehab at age 19. And yet, the story you are about to hear, the story Nick now lives out through his life, is not just about addiction. That's part of it. But the bigger part, the one I really hope you hear loud and clear today, is a story about finding hope, grasping resilience, and holding fast to strength of what it looks like to rebuild, even when everything else seems like it's lost. Today, Nick joins us to share what led to his battle with substance abuse, the tumultuous road to recovery, and then ultimately how, after 13 years of sobriety, he is a passionate voice for mental health and for addiction recovery. My friends, whether it is you or someone you know who is struggling with an addiction, I promise you, this conversation today with my friend Nick is a reminder of the power of second chances and that even in our darkest moments, we're never alone and the best is yet to come. So buckle up. Trust me on this one. Buckle up. You'll need that seatbelt on for this one. Grab your Live Inspired journal and pen, and let's roll into the conversation with my friend and now yours. His name is Nic Sheff. Nick, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
John, great to be here. Great to meet you.
Well, but before we hit record, you already got me in stitches 3 or 4 different times. So there's this wild, crazily emotional, tragic, and yet ultimately massively redemptive story that you and I are going to walk through together. And I can't wait for our listeners and viewers to get it. But today, if I were to bump into you at a quick trip at some little shop where you're just picking up maybe some diapers and some bottled water, and I said, Nick, tell me about you. How do you even answer that question today when you meet people randomly about who you are today?
Yeah, that's interesting because if I talk about being an author, then I feel like people will say, well, what kind of books do you write? And then I'll say, oh, I wrote a memoir or a couple of memoirs. And they're like, oh, what did you write a memoir about? And then it's like, well, about my time as a drug addict, like living on the streets of San Francisco and stuff. So it gets really heavy really quickly. So I feel like a lot of times I'll just kind of try to skirt the issue a little bit. And I actually have been writing now for television and for movies too. So I kind of focus on that more. And I'm in the 12-step program. And it's amazing thing about I just was on a meeting at noon right before this, a Zoom meeting. And looking around at all the faces on the meeting, it's all people who have jobs and families, and they look like totally normal upstanding
Right.
citizens, and you just would never guess that they've been through what they've been through. And I think there is an element of that for me, even with myself. Like when I sort of see myself, I'm like, I can't believe that I went through everything that I went through. It seems like, I mean, and it was a long time ago now too. I've been sober for 13 years. So the worst of it in terms of like the active using stuff was kind of a long time ago. But I think the cool thing is that going to these meetings and talking to people, just how much people's lives do change for the
Yeah.
better. And it's just amazing to see people who have gone to such depth of despair and loneliness to just be able to sort of come out the other side and rebuild their lives and rebuild their families.
Well, I'm looking at Exhibit A in front of me right now. It's one of the most remarkable recoveries I've ever read about. And I'm grateful to be in front of the man who helped lead it and hear a little bit of the stories of individuals who were part of it. So we're going to back up away from the baby stroller, which is behind you, and away from the
Yeah.
busyness of your life today, back to when you were a kid. Because part of what makes your story so relatable is how ordinary it was. We all have differences, of course, growing up, but dude, you were a normal, healthy, handsome, bright, buoyant little boy. So just talk about life for you growing up as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that is true. And I mean, I don't know about handsome, but I was definitely, like I had parents that loved me, and I had certainly tons of opportunities and a community of family friends and family around me that were all really supportive of me. So I definitely from the outside kind of had everything that I could have asked for. So I don't know why exactly inside I felt so different, and I felt so isolated and just other. Like I feel like I would look around at the other kids in my class, and they all seemed so confident and like they were so sort of together, and I just didn't feel that way at all. I felt like a total kind of alien, like dropped off on the planet by mistake or something.
Wh-
And so
when did you first feel that way?
gosh, it was kind of there as far as back as I can remember, really. I mean, I always remember feeling sort of different from my peers and uncomfortable in my own skin and anxious, really in my head, overthinking everything, overanalyzing everything in a way that made it really tough to just sort of be present and be enjoying, whatever was going on around me. And I would have moments of that, of course, just, playing with my friends or with my siblings. But there was this piece of me, I feel like always, that felt just somehow just not quite like I was at disease constantly. Like there was an uneasiness inside of me. And yeah, I don't know exactly where that came from.
As a dad who has never really felt that unease myself, it pains me to think about one of my kids going through it, or really any child going through it. And you quietly went through this. With any hole in your heart, you try to fill it, whether that's with achievements or various other things. But one of the ways you began to fill your hole was with drug use, and it started early.
Yeah, I mean, I was 11 when I smoked pot for the first time, which is crazy when I think about like my friends who have kids that age and I see them and they look like little kids at 11. But when I was that age, yeah, I felt all those things that I just described, uncomfortable in my own skin, like I didn't fit in. And a friend of mine brought some pot to school. His older brother was a dealer. And, when he offered it to me, I didn't even think twice about it really. Pot was so ubiquitous, where I mean, I grew up in the Bay Area, so it was everywhere. And I think it's even more that way now. And there is this sort of myth around pot smoking that it's natural, it's harmless or whatever. So yeah, so I didn't think twice about it, and I did it that first time, and it really did give me a sense of relief from all those feelings that I described. And I really like kind of fell in love with it the first time I did it because it took me out of myself and it felt like it was exactly the thing that was looking for because I wanted some relief and this was giving me that relief. And so from that first time trying it, I really just tried to do it as much as I possibly could. And I remember feeling like I guess it was a secret I was keeping. Like I didn't let my family know that I was doing it, but it also felt like this thing that was kind of like I guess it felt like the answer to my problems. And then eventually, of course, it became my problem. But at first, it felt like the solution, not the problem.
Well, this solution, which became the problem, becomes an intensifying problem, not only as you use it more frequently as a child. I mean, you're 11. I have all four of my kids are older than you were when you started using. And it just blows my mind. You are a baby when you begin using. And then you begin using additional drugs in addition to marijuana. What else did you begin experimenting with in middle
Yeah, I
school?
mean, I drinking like around that same time, and I had sort of a similar feeling when I would drink for the first time. And I remember actually a friend of mine from that same school. We went up to like a ski cabin, and they had like a liquor cabinet there. And after his parents went to sleep, we went and we like took little bits from each of the liquor bottles so that they wouldn't notice that any had been missing. and mixed it all together. And I remember he drank a little bit of it and was like, oh, this is disgusting. Like, I'm not drinking any more of this. But for me, even then, at 11 years old, like I drank it, and the feeling that it gave me immediately, I liked so much that I ended up drinking the whole bottle of mixed alcohol that we had made, and then, like throwing up all over the place. And afterwards, of course, the next morning, like swearing I was never going to do it again. And then the next opportunity I had, I did it
Mm.
again. And then as I got into high school, I did experiment with sort of all the different drugs that were around at the time. And there was a thing too, because I was smoking pot so much and I didn't realize then that it is a depressant. So as I was smoking more and more pot, I think I was also getting kind of more and more depressed. And then I would try to smoke more to feel better. And then it was just making me even more depressed. And then at a certain point, it felt like it didn't matter how much pot I was smoking. I wasn't getting that same sense of relief that I'd gotten before. And so that was really when I started to like look for, kind of harder drugs to give me that feeling that pot had given me at first. And I will say, just as a side note, I at the time I never thought about asking someone for help or telling anyone what I was going through, because I didn't think they would be able to understand. But I also felt like even if they could understand, it didn't seem like there would be any solution. Like there was nothing that someone could do to make me feel better. It just felt like this was who I was. I was someone that, really felt bad a lot of the time. And the drugs were the only thing that had ever made that better. And so when the pot stopped working, yeah, that was when I tried cocaine and ecstasy, we called it at the time, Molly now. And then, really wasn't until I found like crystal meth that was like the one that really, once I did that drug for the first time, everything changed and my life spiraled out of control super super quickly. And at the time I'd never even heard of crystal meth. It was before Breaking Bad. It was before these ad campaigns to sort of educate people about how dangerous meth was. It literally was just someone offered me some speed at a party and I did it, and I was, instantly addicted to it.
So we have friends who listen to our conversation from 50 states and 130 countries. One of them is named Mom. So mom is listening to this conversation right now. And the question she's curious about, and so is her son, if I'm being real with you, is what actually is meth? Number one, like what is it? We all
Yeah,
know what marijuana is and
yeah.
what coke is and what alcohol is, but what is meth? And then secondly, what does it do to the brain?
Okay, interesting. It's funny. My dad, who is a journalist, has done a ton of research on all of this, and I think would be able to answer this question better than I can. But as someone that did it myself, from what I understand, is that crystal meth it's a synthetic drug. It's an amphetamine, so it's a stimulant. And from what I understand, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they've done tests where if someone smokes pot, like their serotonin levels will be raised, a certain percentage. I can't remember exactly what it is, but pot raises your serotonin levels. But with crystal meth, when you do that drug, your serotonin levels are raised beyond exponentially. Like it just is like this explosion of sort of a good feeling in your brain, and it's much more potent than cocaine is and much longer lasting. I think the half life of cocaine is like a half an hour or something. It's really not very long. So if you do a line of cocaine, within a half hour, it's the drug is half as strong as it was when you did it that first time. But with crystal meth, the half life of it is like 10 hours or something. So if you do a line of crystal meth, it takes 10 hours for the drug to get to be half as strong as it was when you first did it. So when I did it that first time, it was like I was awake for like 3 days or something. And again, it's cheaper than cocaine because it's made synthetically. It can be made within the country, although I think that has shifted now and that more of it is coming from overseas and across the border and stuff. But it really is a drug that I was not educated about at all growing up. Like I said, I'd never heard about it. I'd always been really warned about heroin as being like the drug that you should never try because you could get addicted to it, if you just try it one time. And I remember I had that thought in my head, and I kind of recognized as a young person that I was like, okay, I kind of have an addictive personality, obviously. So I should stay away from heroin. But I had not gotten that message about crystal meth or speed. So I was completely caught unaware. And yeah, the moment I did it, I would say I was instantly addicted to it. It completely changed my personality. It made me incredibly arrogant, incredibly paranoid because I was staying up for days at a time, which in and of itself, will drive you crazy. It would cause these things called amphetamine psychoses where I would be able to answer questions and I knew like I was talking to John or whoever, but I also would be having these complete delusions at the same time and think that there were people that were like outside listening to me when I was inside and watching me and all these crazy things. So it really is a destructive drug and super, super dangerous and cheap to make and cheap to buy. So that makes it even more dangerous.
Nic, I'm sure there's a bunch of folks listening to our conversation, and in a moment, they're going to hear your story of recovery and relapse and recovery and relapse and recovery and relapse. And it's just an agonizing slow burn to redemption. But there's going to be folks also listening thinking, yeah, odd story. I don't know why this guy chose this path, but it must be kind of rare. For those who think that your story is unique to you, it's not super common. There's not that many kids who are turning to this kind of drug use. What would be your response to them?
Well, I mean, since I wrote a book about my experience, and my dad, who's a journalist, wrote a book about his experience too. And we had this, I can talk more about this later, but we had this opportunity to travel the country. We've literally been to all 50 states at this point, talking to people about these issues. And then there was a movie based on our book came out. So then we did it again, and we traveled the country. And I mean, I've literally talked to I would say tens and thousands of people all across the country who have, if not the exact same experience that I had, at least the sort of feelings were the same. And they say it's about 10% of the population that has a substance use issue. So, that's 1 in 10 people. And there's different, I think, levels of substance use disorder. I look at it, and I believe this completely, as being a disease. It's a brain disease. And it took me a long time to accept that fact. But I believe that I am someone with the disease of addiction, alcoholism. And when they've done studies on this, there's oftentimes a genetic component that goes along with having this disease. And again, this is not anything that I knew when I was growing up, but my mom's dad literally drank himself to death, like in a VA hospital. She has alcoholism going back generations on her side of the family. And I also remember one time when I was using meth and I was on the street hanging out with this street kid guy in San Francisco. And we were talking, and I said, my grandfather drank himself to death. And this boy was like, oh, my grandfather also drank himself to death. And then there we were, like on a rooftop shooting crystal meth. So the reality that there is often a genetic component to this, I think really I can, I mean, I think that that is absolutely true in my case, at least. But it doesn't have to be, I am, like I said, I was on a 12-step meeting right before talking to you. And, some people are there for hard drug use. Some people are there just for alcohol. Some people are there just for smoking pot. People can have their lives ruined by substance abuse, whether that's from hard drugs or sort of legal drugs like alcohol. and it doesn't make the sort of devastation to their lives or to their families' lives any less acute. In some ways, I feel like, even though this is a weird thing to say, I feel kind of lucky in some ways that I did sort of crash and burn so quickly, and then I began using those hard drugs so quickly. I mean, there are consequences that I've had because of that for sure, and we can talk about those. But I also think that because I went to such an extreme so quickly, it forced me to get into treatment earlier. And, I remember when I went to my first rehab, I was 18, and there were people there that were in their 70s. And they were telling me at the time, as much as this sucks to be 18 and in a rehab, you're really lucky because you're learning about this stuff now and you have an opportunity to change your life now as opposed to waiting until you're older. So, in that sense, I guess that's the sort of silver lining to it. But yes, it affects people all across the country of all ages. I look at addiction as being like an equal opportunity destroyer, right? It doesn't matter what socioeconomic background you come from, what cultural background you come from. Addiction really can affect anyone. And I think almost everybody, if not everybody, has some connection, someone in their life that has a substance use issue.
So I've read your book before I saw the movie, and I kept thinking that when you went to rehab, you finally had it figured out. And probably like you did, probably like your dad did. Like
Yeah.
this time, Nick's got it. This time, Nick's got it. And what broke me and made me resent you, if I'm being honest about it,
Yeah.
and then ultimately cheer for you, is how you kept falling back into the same ugly, messy, pathetic rut,
Yeah.
and then drawing back from the very bottom and trying again and trying again and trying again. And although I've never had an addiction, I know the power of what it looks like to try again. It's something that you don't feel worthy of receiving. The hole remained in your heart this entire time. That's part of the problem here. So to talk us through maybe one of the rehab centers. We don't have time to go through all of it, but
Yes.
what is it like to have all the freedom in the world as a young man to be using with your friends, and then all of a sudden to be dropped off at a sidewalk, to be brought into a building and have the doors shut behind you? What's that like?
When I first went to my first treatment center, I guess I just didn't know what to expect. And I was scared, of course, but I also, because I didn't know anything about the disease of addiction or anything, like I really thought that I was going to go in there and they were going to sort of teach me how to like just drink like a normal person or like just smoke pot like a normal person. I thought it was like a kind of going to be like a behavior modification kind of program. When I got there, that obviously that's not what they said. They told me that I have a disease and the disease of addiction, and that I was never going to be able to drink or use for the rest of my life, which was really terrifying. Especially, I mean, that's where it is tough as a young person to be trying to get sober, is because, I looked around at my peers and all of them were, or most of them, it seemed like were drinking and using to some degree. And even though they weren't destroying their lives in the same way that I was, it was, it's such a part of our culture. So the idea of being 18, 19-year-old kid and not be able to drink, not be able to participate in these sort of social customs or whatever, it just seemed like my life was going to be over or something. So there was that element. The other thing that struck me when I went to treatment was that I went into sort of the group room with all the other people that were there, and I was the youngest person at that first rehab I went to.
Can
And
I
I
just
looked,
catch? Did you feel better than them? Were you looking around the room like, what am I doing here with these guys?
yes, I think did for sure, especially like the older people that, like, there was the guy like classic like who'd like lost his teeth or whatever, and the person that had really been homeless for a long period of time. And I felt like my problems would never be as bad as that. And at that time, I hadn't experienced some of the things that I would eventually experience. So yes, I felt like I was in the wrong place. And when I saw on the walls of the room, they had the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, I guess, written out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the 12 steps, they talk about God a lot. And the word God is mentioned like quite a few times in the steps. And I think there was even a framed sort of picture on the wall that said, let go and let God. And so seeing that too, I was like, oh, this is a religious program. Like, there's no way that this is going to work for me because I was raised as like a total atheist. My family was not just like agnostic, like really like militant atheist. And so it just felt like, okay, this is like a cult and a religious program. And there's no way that I'm ever going to be able to like benefit from this because I won't be able to believe in God and I'm not going to be able to drink the Kool-Aid or whatever. So even though after getting out of that treatment center, I did realize that I had a problem and that, the drugs were really negatively affecting my life, like to put it mildly. It took me a while to accept the fact that, first of all, that I have a disease and that when I would relapse, I feel like there was an interesting thing that happened. Like after I wrote my memoir, my dad had also finished his book, Beautiful Boy, and we sent them to each other, and it was this really kind of profound thing because for me, reading my dad's book, I had always sort of had this feeling like if I wanted to kill myself with drugs and alcohol or whatever, that was kind of my business and that my dad would be able to sort of forget about me. He'd remarried. I had a stepmom. I have a half brother and sister. So I thought he'd be able to be like, okay, I have one son who's like a dud. I'm just going to forget about him and just focus on my other family or whatever. But reading his book, I could see that that was not ever possible for him. He was just consumed with worry. His marriage almost broke apart because of my using. I really got to see the effect that my drug use had on my little brother and sister. Like, it made me realize that I wasn't living in a vacuum. Okay. And so for my dad, he talked about how when he read my book, he always had this idea that when I was relapsing, like you're talking about, and he would get really frustrated with me and angry with me because he would think I was just wanting to have fun and I was just out there, partying or whatever and giving my middle finger to the world. But he said that after reading my book, what he saw was that when I was relapsing, it wasn't because I was wanting to have fun. It was because I was just in a ton of pain, really. And, it was like I was on fire. And the only thing that I'd ever found to put that fire out was drugs and alcohol. And so I would reach out to them again when I was just in too much pain. And then as soon as I would put a mind altering substance in my body, I mean, that was the sort of crazy thing was as soon as I would drink, as soon as I would try smoking pot again, as soon as I would take a pill that someone had, it was like this invisible switch would get flipped and I just could not stop. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was just this obsession. And they talk about that in the 12-step program, that it's an allergy of the body, which it really was like I had an allergy and an obsession of the mind that once I started, it was all I could think about. It was just this obsession. And then I'd be off and running again. So it really took a number of different treatment centers and consequences
Mm.
before I finally was willing to accept the fact that, okay, this is a disease. I have this disease. And it's true. Whenever I put a mind altering substance into my body, no matter what it is, that invisible switch gets flipped and I cannot stop. And so I'm going to have to figure out something else that's going to fill that hole in me, something else that's going to put that fire out, because otherwise I can't live being on fire all the time. And ultimately, what that ended up being was, I guess, a combination of things to some degree, but in a large part, it really was accepting what was written in those 12 steps that was on the wall. And I resisted it for such a long time. But once I actually started to do what was suggested of me in those rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and once I started doing the work that they told me to do, I started to feel relief and the fire started to get put out. And it took longer than I wished it had. And I caused more destruction than I wished I had. But gosh, I'm so grateful that I finally gave it a try, because that was really what it took, was just trying it. As soon as I tried it, I got the results, and the results were amazing.
So, brother, you filled a couple books with stories of relapse. How many times in total did you get clean, feel like you had it figured out, relapse, hit bottom, and then bounce forward again? How often was that process?
Gosh, yeah, I would say I think I ended up going to like 5 different treatment centers, whether that was like an inpatient treatment center or sober living, which is like where you kind of you live in community with other sober people. You go to work during the day, but you have a curfew. You come back, you get drug tested. You do meetings with it in the sober living community. So I would say that was sort of 5 times. There was one relapse that was kind of like the worst relapse, which was really when I started using intravenous drugs. I ended up getting an infection in my arm from a dirty needle. And when I went to the emergency room, finally, the doctor initially thought that he was going to have to amputate my arm because the infection was so bad. And I just was really lucky that it wasn't quite as bad as he thought it was when he opened up the abscess,
Mhm.
but just like a horror movie. I woke up in the hospital one time with a tube down my throat on life support after overdosing. So it really was one of those things where it was like every time I thought it couldn't get worse, it would. But then, even after I finally sort of stopped using the hard drugs, that was when I really came to terms with this idea of the disease of addiction, because
Yes.
that was when I said, okay, I'm not going to use these hard drugs anymore. They're obviously destroying my life. But what about if I just tried drinking? I've never really had a problem with alcohol. I was in those rehabs before I was even 21, so I wasn't even able to drink. So I tried just drinking for a while, and it literally got to the point where I was waking up in the morning and the first thing I was doing was going in and getting a bottle of vodka that I'd hidden in the closet or whatever, and was drinking as so much that I was getting the shakes in the morning and just being sick constantly. And really, that was really when I was like, okay, like everything that they told me was going to happen to me has happened to me. Like they were right, I was wrong. And so now I'm just willing to do anything that they tell me to do, because I am one of these people that they kept telling me I was, even though I didn't want to believe it.
Someone asked you in one of the treatment centers, I think, what do you hate so much about yourself?
Yes, yes.
It's like a painful question because first glance, it's like, well, nothing, dude, I'm fine. But the reality is to put your body through what you did and to put your family through what you did. If you dig deep enough, you'll have an answer. How do you answer that today? Back then, what did you hate so much about yourself?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that was a really profound moment. That's interesting you remember that, because I never thought about it that way. Like of course, like I was like, I'm uncomfortable in my own skin, blah, 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 blah. But I really did hate myself. I didn't want to live as myself, and I was willing to do anything to take me out of myself so I didn't have to live as myself. I don't know what it was exactly that I hated about myself, other than just sort of everything. Like I just did not, like I didn't want to be me, and the drugs and alcohol made me feel like I wasn't me, and that was what I wanted. And I don't know where that came from. Like I said, I think there's probably a genetic component there, in terms of not just the alcoholism, but also the mental health issues that I've had. I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which was like, when I finally was diagnosed with that, it was a relief. Honestly, like I know there are people that get a diagnosis like that and they're like bummed about it. But for me, I was like, oh, finally someone's telling me what's wrong with me, or one of the things that's wrong with me. And so I got on medication for that, and it wasn't like night and day, like suddenly everything was better or different, but it was I sort of look at recovery, well, I look at addiction as being like a kind of perfect storm of all these different pieces that come together to make someone an addict. For me, I had mental health issues, I had this genetic component, They say that people who have experienced trauma are more likely to have a substance use issue. They say the younger you start using drugs and alcohol, the more likely you are to have
And man,
substance.
you're like checking all these boxes.
Yes, exactly. So I think it was sort of a perfect storm in that way. And I think recovery is sort of a similar thing in the sense that it's like it's a puzzle and there's all these puzzle pieces that sort of come together to allow me to get sober and then to stay sober. And getting on the psychiatric medication for bipolar disorder, for depression, that has been a puzzle piece for sure.
Hmm.
The 12 steps have been a puzzle piece for me. Talk therapy, like I still have the same psychiatrist. I mean, she prescribes me the psychiatric medication, but I do talk therapy with her too. And I've had the same psychiatrist for 13 years, as long as I've been sober. And, I still meet with her twice a month. And it's interesting. I feel like when you have a disease like this, or like any disease, really, like if I had diabetes, there would be things I had to do in order to make sure that I was treating my disease every day. I would have to take my insulin and check my blood sugar levels and watch what I eat and all that stuff. And for this disease that I have, it's sort of similar in the sense that there's work that I have to do every day to treat my illness. I have to take my medication. I have to do 12-step meetings. I have to really sort of keep my side of the street clean. I have to go and get my blood work done to make sure that the levels of lithium in my system are healthy and all this stuff. So it is work that I have to do. But the cool thing is that the work works. And that's the thing that when I was a teenager and I was at the point where I was graduating from smoking pot all the time and drinking a little bit to doing hard drugs, and I thought, oh, if I ask for help right now, no one's going to be able to help me. What I know now is that that's not true, that there is help out there and there is a way to treat this disease, but not just to treat it, but to treat it and then to live this really full, beautiful life, even though you are someone that has the disease of addiction and alcoholism and someone that has these mental health issues. And I think the cool thing and the reason that it's even worth talking about is because there are people working in every community all around this country. And I've met a lot of them who have devoted their lives to helping people
Yeah.
like me to recover. And it's a daily thing, but it really, like, the results are real. I have a beautiful life today. And it's not because of having a movie made about me, or I mean, that stuff is weird and scary and interesting, but those aren't the things that make my life worthwhile. What really makes me feel joy is like going for a walk with my dog, or just these little things, like watching a movie with my wife, or going out to dinner. Like, I never thought I would be able to enjoy these simple things that other people seem to enjoy and get pleasure from. And now I feel so happy just like going on a walk and listening to an audiobook or
Hmm.
something. And it's such a miracle because it really felt like that would never be a possibility for me.
Whew. So I asked you 17 minutes ago, what did you hate about your life? And your first word out was everything. And I think if I asked you the question right now, what do you love about your life today? You'd give me the same answer.
Yeah,
Dude, everything. It's
no,
imperfect, but I love everything.
it's
So
true.
you mentioned your wife on the couch. You mentioned the walk with the dog. You forgot to mention a 1 month old
Yes,
upstairs
yes,
sleeping.
that's a new addition. Yeah.
It's a pretty awesome addition, man. So when I read your story and when I follow your life, there's so many heroes in it, and one of them is the guy I'm interviewing. But undoubtedly, one of the other heroes is the man who raised you, a man who just refused to give up on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how he remained so steadfast. Your dad just remained in the fight for you until he finally won it. It's a crazy love story. So you received that kind of love from your dad. Now you get to hold your baby. How do you want to make sure your little man knows
Mm-hmm.
that love for him as you raise him up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's interesting because over the years, like I mentioned, my dad and I, and me separately, and we've traveled the country and we've talked to families and people who've had similar experiences to ours. And I would say, like, the number one question we get asked at every event is, what advice would you give for parents to make sure that their children don't ever have to go through basically what I went through and what our family went through. And it's a really tough question. And because of knowing about this genetic component with the addiction and with the mental health stuff, I was nervous, to be honest, about having kids, just because I was worried about passing that on. And it's only sort of recently, in the last few years or something, that I've really been able to see that even if someone does have these mental health issues and these
Yeah.
substance use issues, that it is really possible to live a full, beautiful life. And I think the thing that I want to make sure that I do, besides giving him, Charlie, lots of love and attention, and it's been so fun. Like, that's the thing. I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to feel about it, until he's out in the world. But it's just been amazing. And my wife and we take shifts, so she kind of stays up with him for most of the night, and then around like 5 in the morning, I take over. And that morning time where it's just me and him is like
Best.
such a joy. And I just am staring at him and bouncing him around. And it's just the most incredible thing. And it's so joyful. And I'm so grateful for it. But as he gets older, I think education is really the most important thing when it comes to these issues. And once he's old enough to understand this, I want to make sure that he understands that this is something that he will potentially have a predisposition to, and just to be aware and to try to identify those feelings of not feeling comfortable in his own skin, or feeling anxiety, and knowing that instead of waiting for it to escalate or get worse, to really treat those issues as they come up and treat them early. I've seen with other families that early intervention really does work and really makes a difference. And I'm not saying that I would do this to little Charlie, but I do wish that when I was in high school, I would have gotten on psychiatric medication. And I mean, I think it would have really helped me. And I think it could have made a big difference, actually. So I know now that there are things that can help to sort of treat these issues and help so that they don't have to go to the extreme level of suffering that
Mm.
my family went through.
Sometime I'd love to bring you back on and we'll talk about the 12 steps in greater detail. And the one I would spend the majority of our time with is to make amends.
Mm-mm.
I just think it's whether you're walking the steps because you're addicted or because you've done life. This idea of making amends to those we've hurt in the past or in the present is so healing, not only for your present, but for your future. So I look forward to that. So, two questions as we wrap up, and then we have what is called the rapid fire live inspired 7. So we're almost to the finish line, but
Okay.
right
Okay.
now we've got folks tuning in, and some of them have that addiction to whatever the thing is. What's your encouragement to someone who is underwater with addiction right now?
I mean, just that it gets better. I think that's the thing that I never believed. I never believed that without the substances, I would be able to have any kind of life that I really enjoyed living or was okay with. Even it wasn't even about like enjoying life, it was just about feeling okay, and I never thought that I could feel okay without those substances, because they were the only thing that had ever made me feel, had ever taken me out of myself and made me hate myself a little bit less. And I think of it as like kind of in, and this is a dorky reference, but like in the Lord of the Rings, the Gollum with the ring or whatever, and it's like his
God,
precious.
precious. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Like the drugs and alcohol were like my precious. And it felt like if someone was trying to take that away from me, felt like they were trying to kill me, because they were the only things that felt like they'd ever kept me alive.
Mm.
And so to have that faith that there is a better way, that life can get better, that if I let go of these substances and I start doing the work, whether that's in the 12-step program or with a psychiatrist or in a treatment center, that the work is going to work. It's a leap of faith and it's scary, not just from my own experience, but from, the tens of thousands of people I've met all across the country and millions of people who've recovered from this. I just know 100% that it's not only possible to get sober and to stay sober, but then to live this life that is just beyond your wildest dreams and better than anything you could have ever imagined. And again, not because of external things, but because of the way that I feel internally today, and that my brothers and sisters who have this disease also have been able to recover and feel real contentment, which is, I think, the
Hmm.
goal.
And then the final question before the Live Inspired 7, for those listening to our conversation who love someone with an addiction. And if it's not us with the addiction, it is us nodding our heads on this one because we all love somebody with an
Yeah.
addiction. What's your encouragement to us?
Yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating and it's interesting, like being on the other side now that I'm sober. And I've had really close friends who've had substance issues, and I've tried to help them. And it's so frustrating because I can say from my own experience, of course, your life's going to get better. Like, just do this thing. But it's really, it's hard. It's scary for someone in the middle of it to believe that. And it's really hard to love someone who is going through that and to not feel angry at them. And I guess I would say that that's okay. Like, there's this concept of ambivalence where it's like you can hold two feelings at the same time, and just to allow yourself that's like you can love this person, but you can also be really angry at them, and you can absolutely worship them as someone that you love and look up to, but you can also be afraid of them and afraid of what they're going to do to your family and yourself. And so, sort of give yourself permission to feel all those feelings, and then to know that there is hope out there and not to give up, because it can feel really bleak and scary, and just to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that, I've seen people that have lost everything and gone down to such a degree that it didn't seem possible that they would ever be able to heal and rebuild their lives. And 100% of the time, those people, if they stay sober, they do the work, they keep going to meetings, working the steps, like it's kind of a miracle, but their lives get better and they're able to rebuild those relationships.
Nick, I could spend the rest of the day with you, man, but we're going to begin moving this one toward the finish line. We have
Okay, okay,
7
yeah,
questions, rapid fire.
okay.
Question number 1, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Oh gosh, I mean, I hate to be cliche, but the big book of Alcoholics
I
Anonymous.
assumed it might be, man.
Yeah.
What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little kid growing up in California that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
My like imagination. I feel like I've become, now that I work in TV and film and stuff, I feel like I'm like trying to think of everything in a very story, A, B, and C way. And when I was a kid, I would just create these crazy stories and have this crazy imagination. And I wish I could tap into that more now.
If your home caught fire and your bride and your baby and any animals you may have are out safely,
Dog.
and you have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one thing, what's the one thing you would run inside, save, and come back outside safely with?
I would say my little sister's paintings that I have. She's an amazing artist, and I have a couple of her paintings, and I would just be devastated to lose those.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone, living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Oh my gosh. That's a tough one. Well, my dad, as I said, is a journalist. He's been working on Yoko Ono's biography recently. And so I've been reading that as he's been working on it. And John Lennon would be amazing to sit and talk to. My dad got the chance to interview John Lennon before his death, obviously, but right before his death. And it changed my dad's life. And yeah, I would love that opportunity.
What's the best advice Lennon, dad, or anyone else ever gave you?
There's a thing in the 12-step program where they say don't quit before the miracle happens, and I wanted to absolutely kill them when they said that, because it's so like frustrating, but it's really good advice because the great thing about life is you never know what's going to happen. And
Mm.
there's been times when I wanted to quit and give up, and I'm just so grateful that I never did.
If you could go back in time and whisper some wisdom your way at age 20, what advice would you give yourself?
I think that too, just that I was, things were going to get better, that I was going to feel better. I was going to have a wife that I love, a baby that I love, a dog that I love. Like, if I could have known all those things, I think I would have felt less fearful.
Nic Sheff, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
Oh gosh, I just that I have been able to have so much love and joy in my life. And it's because of the people that have refused to give up on me, refused to turn their back on me. They've given me so much love, and I feel like I have had so much love in my life, and I'm
Mm.
very grateful for that.
Nic Sheff spent a several decade period longing to have that hole filled in his heart. It never was until finally he surrendered, gave up chasing what was already his, and embraced the love that had been pursuing him the entire time. Man, I'm
Mm,
glad you did. I'm glad you're giving it back. And I wish you and your wife and your little baby all the joy in the world, man.
thank you. That was beautifully said, and such an honor to meet you and to I mean and just I look up to you so much, all the work that you've done and how many people you've touched, and I mean there's just nothing better than being able to do that service work that you do. So thank you.
My friends, that is Nic Sheff complimenting the chef, John O'Leary. My name is John O'Leary. I'm grateful for all of your time and in particular his. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. It is a miracle. Live inspired. Well, my friends, in today's conversation, Nic referred to addiction, you may have written it down in your journal, as an equal opportunity destroyer. And he went on to say that people can have their lives ruined by substance abuse, whether that's from hard drugs or legal drugs like alcohol. It doesn't make the devastation to their lives or to their families' lives any less acute. And according to the 2023 United States National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 48.5 million, that's almost 17% of Americans aged 12 and above, battle with substance abuse. That's why continuing these conversations is so important. Bring from the shadows, bring from the shade, from the darkness into the light so we can have conversations of healing around it. Over the last 8 years of the Live Inspired podcast, we have welcomed on a variety of voices who've bravely shared their journeys through addiction, whether facing it themselves or supporting a loved one impacted by it. One such conversation was with comedian and content creator. Her name is Tiffany Jenkins. You may remember it. And if not, you'll want to check it out. As the best-selling author of the book High Achiever, Tiffany shares how after just 3 months after her first sip of alcohol, she was on her way to a more than decade-long addiction, from varsity cheerleader to high school dropout, dating a sheriff to committing 24 felonies. Tiffany shares her hard-won journey to redemption and to sobriety. Don't miss this emotional conversation that breaks through the stigma surrounding the opioid crisis and offers hope and encouragement to anyone who is battling addiction or loves someone who might be. To learn more about Tiffany Jenkins and to listen to the podcast between Tiffany and me, check it out at episode 286. I know, way back then. Or just cruise over with me right now to the website, johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. We'll have a link in the show notes to Tiffany Jenkins episode 286 right there. My friends, I want to thank you for coming out of the darkness and into the light as you tune into the weekly episodes with Live Inspired podcast. And I want to thank you for tuning in this week. And until next time, my name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.